Good afternoon. Once again, welcome back to the Senate Committee on Government Operations Committee meeting of Wednesday, April 29th, 2026. Up next for our consideration is H 935. This is the act relating to emergency management. Jim Devlin has joined us, and I believe we also have, is it Jordan Gondon here? Yeah, and Eric Thorin. And so it might be helpful, since the third reading of the Senate version of the budget was passed today and messaged to the House forthwith, I think.
Yeah.
That Eric go back, or Tim go back over the appropriations piece of this bill to see what's still in there and what isn't anymore.
Right. For the record, Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel. Thank you very much for having me into the community about this. I won't be able to speak with any real authority and knowledge of what was passed out in the budget itself. I apologize. I was not following.
Okay.
In particular, I'm happy to revisit the exact language of the as passed by the House.
That's fine.
Sure. So let's see. Where are we? The bill we were on section 12. Okay, so this will into the appropriations will begin. All right, section say, because there's a lot of contingency language in here on page 26 as passed by the House bill. So we have section 12, Department of Public Safety Communications Task Force, authorization for ongoing expenditure of funds. So you have A1, where this is the redesignating of previously appropriated funds. So we have $2,250,000 shall be available for immediate costs associated with establishment of multidisciplinary computer aid dispatch system, 5 years of software licensing fees. $190,000 shall be immediately available for cybersecurity, expanding use of rapid SOS and geographic information systems. They have $4,500,000 shall be available incrementally over 3 years to A, implement and expand the land mobile radio network and include the statewide conceptual design. B, detailed designs for one or more proof of concept projects and initially pilot projects. And C, build out or improve 10 or more land mobile radio sites, including equipment and antenna deployment in existing sites. So then,
Yes.
We have the fiscal note, and this was done by Ted. Why don't we just ask Lynn if she could get Ted to come over and update us on what made it through to the House?
Yeah, I have the same.
Yeah, but it's not updated to the vote today. I mean,
That's true, and it may well be that joint fiscal has not had a chance to get it.
no, they know what's in the bill. I mean, Ted could tell us right now. If you want to know an update on it, we could just invite Ted over to see if he could.
Great idea.
Okay, well, then we could just, so we don't have to, I mean, you have all the other parts of the bill. Ted Barnett, thank you. I enjoyed it. Sorry, did I not say Ted Barnett?
No, you just said Ted, but everybody knew us.
Sorry, but Lynn, so I apologize, Lynn.
That would be great. Even if you could join us virtually.
Yeah, okay.
I do know some of that was not.
A lot didn't make it over, so it's.
Okay, so with that in mind, are there other, we have a couple of other, we have an amendment, draft 1.1, which was requested by the folks from the fire group. And I'm fine with that. If you want to go over that one, Tim.
happy to. So there is this one instance of amendment, and this will add a section 11A, entitled Increasing Wildlife Fire Response Capacity Task Force report. And this is just kind of boilerplate language about setting up a task force. We'll create the increasing wildland fire response capacity report. See, that should actually read task force of all of these. We'll update that. to examine and report on increasing Vermont's capacity for wildlife fire response. We go on to detailing the membership, which is the following individuals and entities shall be invited by the Department of Forests, Parks and Recreation to join the task force. So we have Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation, Vermont Emergency Management, Department of Public Safety, Division of Fire Safety, Green Mountain National Forest, Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and not more than 2 municipal fire chiefs. So, powers and duties. The task force shall examine how to best increase Vermont's capacity for wildlife fire response. 1, examining available information on wildland fire incidents and existing response capacity, making recommendations regarding staffing, funding, equipment, supplies, and infrastructure, including vehicles necessary to increase wildland fire response capacity. 2, identify any potential policy or statutory changes needed to improve wildland fire response capacity, clarify state roles and responsibilities of state and federal entities, and recommend any coordination and communication improvements. Assistance for the task force can be provided by the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation. The report will be due on or before November 15th of 2027. And
Really, it's going to take them a year and a half.
And this was something that was updated during drafting. I think the request was actually for earlier this summer. So I leave that to the commission or the committee to see exactly when you want that date set. I can pull up that date as originally recommended.
I mean, Eric and Rome, we have a fire. I mean, Eric, is it really going to take them a year and a half to do this thinking? This one?
I mean, it depends on how in-depth it is, but probably be wanting to short.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great to get, just given our where we are with climate change and the need to improve our responses and resiliency. Wouldn't it be great to have this report done by December so that we could actually incorporate it into work next year if we had to?
And I misspoke before it was asked the date be set to July 15th, 2027.
But which is useless from a legislative point of view. I mean,
Right, they're not exactly, so you
I mean, it's
are
the point.
maybe not read it,
Just
but
look at it. I mean,
anyways.
it's totally not actionable for another 6 months, so I don't get that. I mean, I might as well keep working if we're gonna. But it strikes me that they could at least begin the work on this with a report, with an update to the legislature in January or December of 27. They could maybe good work, but to have an update on where they are, and what their recommendations are for this next session would be very helpful. You know, climate change is only speeding up here, so I would think that we would want some recommendations sooner rather than later.
Can certainly be added.
Yeah, I have to go back because we did take testimony and I'm sure that there was a reason for the date.
I don't have a note on that. I just know that they, and then the other thing I would recommend is that 2 municipal fire chiefs, well, our world is divided between professional fire departments and volunteer fire departments. And I would really like to have, one is the Goliath and one is the David. And I'd really love to have representation from one professional, one volunteer fire department, because they're very different responders.
If I could make a comment as a volunteer firefighter, the use of professional shouldn't be used, should be career. Career firefighter and a volunteer firefighter, all
Okay.
firefighters.
But do you agree that they're two different,
Yeah.
two different vantage perspectives
Yes, absolutely.
should be included in this? Okay, so one career chief and one volunteer. I think that would make a big difference.
I'm just going over some of the testimony from some of the other fire folks that were in here. See if there's a reason why it was November 27th.
Here, yeah, it's just,
See anything?
I don't know why we couldn't ask them, for a final report in, let's say, November of 27 with an update for us for the session for January, an update to the committees of jurisdiction, January 26th.
You just said,
Yeah, so we can action on it for next year. So they can give us an update
okay.
with
you said
recommendations.
November of 27.
I said, if they want to keep going till November of 27, that's fine by me, but
Oh.
what I'd like to have is an update in January with recommendations for them of their work so far. I mean, just so that we can take action on anything that is of immediate need and concern. Because if we have another drought, I mean, we are in drought right now in Windsor County, and it's
Well, I think the states have.
yeah, no, but it's specific to certain counties where it's worse. So anyway, sooner rather than later, I think. Eric, am I wrong in thinking of this?
I don't have a
You don't have
point
a
of view on
strong,
that one because if they specifically asked for a date, I'm not sure what they're.
Well, they did in the draft of the wildland fire response capacity report language.
Yeah,
It does say on or before July 15, 27, which the Department of Forest Parks Recreation shall submit the report to the House Committee on Ag. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking, no,
that's correct. I got the same thing. Useless date. I mean, it's really a useless date for us. So I would ask that the report be like November of 27 with an update and report to us and recommendations in January 27. I'm just suggesting what you want.
well, ironically, I just got an email from Kathy Decker saying that because the fire season will most likely this year go well into December, that it would be hard to pull together a report in December. So that was their rationale.
okay.
They're fighting two evils. They need resources to fight the fires, but they can't write the report because they're fighting fires.
Correct.
So they're tied up.
All fall.
Yeah, the
It's a
fire
lot of
season
fire.
this year, it's not look good. We've already had 2 critical fire days and normally we have 0.
But that's this year. We're looking at 26. So
Yeah, you were talking about getting the report in 26.
Right,
I'm talking about getting recommendations in January of 27.
That might be.
which is really 26.
I think November of 27 is quite a ways out. Much of that is also fire season, so I wonder if maybe instead of, we could get it in February of 27.
I mean, yeah, it's a useless day in July.
Well,
I mean, it is my brother's birthday, July 15th, but it is,
For a day for a report.
exactly. But it isn't useful for the legislature. It will just sit
Yeah, I
there.
would say
and
if you wanted to reach out to them and see what might be.
I think we should. If there's a good reason for us to move the date, we need.
And see if they would have enough work already, given it goes into effect upon passage, yes. When does it go into effect?
We're
So they could be working on it as the season permits. And may have some immediate recommendations they may want to make for next year's session is the point. They just don't want to have a whole year and a half go by before we act on some of their thoughts. If there's stuff that we can act on next session, it would be great. Maybe there isn't, but. No, but I guess.
okay, let's hear from
Nobody cares.
the state both.
Well, if maybe perhaps if there's pertinent recommendations that we could act on that legislative session, we could
Yeah.
be provided with that information, but I do think my hope is that they would focus on the wildfire prevention and response over reports from us, because I love the idea.
They'll be fine. They're not gonna be. doing
I
fire.
know, I guess I just want to say, I love the idea that you're worried that we would not have the information we need to act in the first year of a biennium. However, I have found that oftentimes we get reports and we put them well in advance of the session and we still don't act. So I would much prefer waiting for the second year of biennium if that's a better option for those people. Because I've asked for many reports that have come nice and early and then they still don't do anything with them that year. So
Updates that come in the form of a witness coming to give us an update and a recommendation for action. That happens.
yes, and I think we could do
That's what
that.
I'm asking. Oh, update. They can give us the damn report whenever they want.
Oh, well, then, okay.
27.
Oh,
But I don't think July works for us. I think that's a date that doesn't work for us. But what I'm asking for is a body in a chair in January or February saying, our preliminary work says we need to do this ASAP and our recommendation for this session is blah. blah.
Oh, okay. I think I misunderstood your point then, because I thought you were saying you wanted the report to come before the.
No, I don't care about reports. I care about bodies and seats in front of people who are listening, saying, this needs to be fixed now. These are our recommendations for how to do it. And we
Yeah.
are asking you to act on that this year.
Keep in mind that that can be the report unless it specifies written.
Correct. Correct.
Ted responded, he said, Chris, is the staff.
Okay,
So should we try?
sure.
I'll just note that the task force is limited to not more than 3 meetings. So according to the minute. So the day aside,
It's not a legislative task force. Why would we limit it when we're not spending that money? That we tend
well,
to.
they get per diem.
What?
They do get per diems and stuff, so it does have some
50
significance.
bucks.
Okay,
Okay, wow, that's crazy that we've limited them to 3 meetings.
well,
How
that must be what they asked.
Yeah, right.
Did they?
This is that request.
I should specify that's just placeholder language.
Oh,
The per diems, kind of actually exploring that, like 32 BSA 1010, there's a provision in there that says, essentially, if these individuals are otherwise salaried, that they don't qualify for it, the per diem really is in there all because it contemplates individuals that could be volunteer.
Right.
Well, it's
So
not,
that's just sort of a default.
It's boilerplate language.
it's a $50 honorarium is what we pay. And if we're not limited to 3, that 3 is like we barely get going. So I think 3 is ridiculous.
We can change that.
Okay, so let's do this. Aside from the date of the final real, no kidding, useless report, to use your
No,
language.
it's not. July is useless. It's all I said. The report is important.
Okay, but we could get an update in February of
Exactly.
27. So
Oh, great.
if you could make that,
Yes.
and then I would strike,
An update and recommendations.
Yes.
I would strike line 5 on page 3. You could reference the Title 32, Section 1010, but just stop there and not say for not more than 3 meetings. They can
Yes,
be as
right.
often as they need.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so that's an amendment that we will see in the bill. Does anyone else have questions for Tim at this point? Okay, you're welcome, certainly, and love to have you stay with us, okay? So next, let's move to, the Department of Environmental Conservation has asked that we add,
Wait, before we leave.
yeah,
Tim, did you get the request from Eric and me and also on 6 that it be 2 fire chiefs, 1 a career and 1 a volunteer?
Yes.
and that gives 7 to the quorum of,
Well, it says not more than 2.
and if you add up everybody at the task force,
Yeah.
it'll be 7.
Yeah, okay, great. That's a good number.
So it is a great number. I like so. Jordan Gonda is here from the Department of Environmental Conservation. And this was a request from Neil Kamen. To add 2 sections to this bill, 935. Both of which were in a bill, as I remember last year, that ran out of yardage. We didn't get to pass it. And it has to do with rulemaking authority in the face of, well, I'll let Jordan explain what we're trying to do here, but I don't have any problem putting this back in.
Oh.
We'd already passed this, but it didn't get to the finish line. So welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Jordan Gonda. I'm General Counsel for the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. I just handed out some language. It's pretty short and sweet. I'll talk about a little bit of what this would effectuate in terms of rulemaking authority and sort of the justification from the Agency of Natural Resources perspective. So this proposal and the language before you would add an additional basis to adopt emergency rulemaking based on federal changes that affect state regulatory authority. We're proposing a time-limited amendment to the Vermont Administrative Procedures Act to include an additional base for expedited or emergency rulemaking. If you're not familiar, Title III, Chapter 25 is the Vermont Administrative Procedures Act, and among other things that establishes the authority and process for rulemaking by state agencies, the general process. There are other rulemaking authorities specific to state agencies that live in various parts of statute, but it sets the general process and timeline. Under typical circumstances, proposed rules do not become effective until the end of the rulemaking period. So that's once LPAR has had a chance to review. This can take several months, up to 8 months, and that from the date of the initial filing with the Secretary of State's office, and this does not account for any pre-rulemaking stakeholder engagement or policy development, proposal development. Currently, however, agencies can adopt emergency rules in very limited situations. In those cases, emergency rules can become effective essentially immediately once they're filed with the Secretary of State's office. They remain effective for 180 days and are still subject to LPAR review. The bases that I'm speaking of for which agencies can initiate emergency rulemaking currently is if those rules are necessary to address an imminent peril to public health, safety, or welfare. And that's codified in Section 844A of Title III. So what this proposal would be adding is an additional basis to initiate emergency rulemaking. So rulemaking that becomes effective upon filing with the Secretary of State's office to address any gaps in state protections that result from changes in federal policy that conflict with or jeopardize an agency's ability to fulfill its state statutory mandate. So just walking through this quickly, there's provisions of, so not currently in H935, but could be amended, 2 sections of additional language that would add that additional basis for rulemaking. And this would sunset, that additional basis would sunset on July 1st, 2028. So that's basically the new language in the handout. So in terms of justification, this proposal focuses on federal changes, including but not limited to the amendment or repeal of federal regulations, as well as the issuance of new federal policies, directives, or enforcement discretion policies. As you may know, the federal administration has proposed a swift and sweeping effort to deregulate environmental and public health protections. As part of these efforts, beginning in early 2025, the administration issued several directives to agencies to identify and prioritize the repeal of regulations using the Federal Administrative Procedures Act's good cause exemption, which basically allows agencies to bypass notice and comment rulemaking. Good cause under the APA allows immediate repeal when the regulation is necessary, impractical, or contrary to the public interest. That good cause provision is not new. However, the federal administration's direction of federal agencies to implement that standard is new. And you can see that in several executive orders and memorandums that have been issued throughout 2025. Requiring the federal agencies to identify unlawful regulations within 60 days of the issuance of the EO based on specific Supreme Court decisions, essentially directing federal agencies to determine whether their own regulations are unlawful, and then act swiftly to identify and prioritize those for repeal, including for good cause, which means that repeal or that rescission or modification becomes effective without public notice and comment. And this.
So we're wanting to prevent that.
I'm sorry.
We're wanting to prevent that.
Well, what we're doing is proposing, asking you to consider giving state agencies the ability to act quickly if any gaps and protections are created by those actions.
That's government at this moment.
Correct.
Okay.
And again, we already have the ability to initiate emergency rulemaking if there's an imminent risk. That's something that agencies have to demonstrate to the legislature as part of the emergency rulemaking action. This would give us more flexibility to not necessarily have to show that imminency, but allow nonetheless for important protections to remain in place. or to bolster state authority that we already have in the presence of any conflict or gap that's created at the federal level.
Have you had an example of that this?
Luckily, no, we have not. We have been tracking federal deregulatory efforts as best we can. There's a lot going on. At sometimes the notification out to states is helpful, sometimes it is not. I would say from ANR's perspective, our state authorities are strong, they're comprehensive. But I will also say that some of these efforts are aimed at activities that don't really affect Vermont. So larger energy producing power plants or types of facilities that we don't see here. However, there's still a few more years left in this administration's tenure, and continue to be press releases, notifications, calls, stakeholder calls, and calls with EPA Region 1 about new things coming down the pipeline. So not yet, but again, we would like to be poised to act quickly if necessary. Do you have any questions about that? I can speak further to ANR's relationship with federal authorities. As you may know, we rely on our federal partners in either a delegated status, that means the federal government or EPA has delegated their authority to ANR to implement certain regulatory programs, or we work cooperatively on an enforcement basis, or otherwise to administer some of the programs that are important to Vermonters. For instance,
Every program, as far as we can tell, and doing through the budget process is important.
right, and some primary areas are Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act. We also rely heavily on federal funding to implement some of our clean water programs, for example. So there is definitely a long established relationship with our federal partners. From a regulatory perspective, enforcement perspective, a funding perspective, et cetera. So, I'm sorry, I asked, does anyone have any, did you have a question?
So I take it this is, you didn't have your own bill, so you're adding on to the 935.
Which I believe is, I'm not sure where it went. I think it went in the emergency bill last year too.
632, I think.
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
And I have that language from last year.
So then what happened that it didn't get passed?
I don't know.
I can't say.
Well, it just didn't happen.
It just didn't.
So we're
happen.
trying to make it
I
happen.
think there might have been some confusion, but I can't say for sure.
Is the effective, well, it's not the effective date, it's, well, I get to this, July 1st, 2028.
So that's when this provision would expire.
Was that true of the provisions that were in the previous bill?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. What I've handed to you today is the language
Yeah,
that Neil.
okay.
We had this conversation because I then asked, a lot of damage can happen between July and November. So why are we ending it in July 28th,
That's
not December 28th? I'm sorry, but
the sunset date is one that's been proposed.
okay, I would propose that we consider December of 28th. And other than that, I think this is a great addition.
So you and I are gonna disagree.
That's okay, we're allowed to disagree.
So nothing happened last year or this year. Well, but I struggle with giving emergency type authority to agencies. I just always have. You give some examples as to why you would need that.
Right. So I just want to clarify though, that this is an emergency rulemaking authority. It does not change the scope of rulemaking authority that is already granted to agencies.
Correct.
It's just the timing that they could become effective.
Correct.
The LCAR would still maintain review. So LCAR would still review the rule to make sure that the standard is satisfied, that it truly isn't needed.
Are you sure? Well, sorry, like stuff like
Right.
you scared.
Oh, she scared me too. No, I'm sorry, I'm just late for legislative management committee, which I totally forgot about.
Yeah. So,
And that is.
so if you could give me some examples. Please,
Yeah, so
of why this is so critical and needed.
well, hopefully, again, this is a prophylactic measure in case there is a gap or conflict related with presidential directive, an executive order, or a
You can
repeal.
always have that, doesn't matter who's the president's going to be, but I understand the president is right now. I get that.
I would say that with the specificity of the types of federal laws that have are on the administration's list to modify, to repeal, to rescind are those that overlap, look similar to state programs, and so far have not caused the gap or a loss of protections to Vermonters. But the concern is that on this track, with those priorities expressed, that there will be an issue where the Agency of Natural Resources or other agencies, the Department of Health, Human HHS, Department of Corrections, there are other policies or other areas of law or policy that the federal government has explained, may be subject to these deregulatory efforts.
Give
So
me some
again,
examples of DEC.
so one area that has been a focus of the federal government's deregulatory efforts is around climate change and air emissions. So endangerment finding, the endangerment finding is an instance where the state was resting on strong state authority to continue its regulatory program. In other areas, primarily through some of the federal funding programs that we participate in, we've been directed to remove policy-related language around DEI-related activities, climate change. So it's a hint that we're no longer in alignment with our federal partners on some of the values and the policy that are important to Vermonters, that for which we have strong state authority, but it is starting to disintegrate those pieces that we once shared concerted efforts.
So the example that I'm sure you quite gave, but the example that you gave, give me an example how the rulemaking would fix that.
The rulemaking would allow us to act with haste to bolster our state programs in the face of a federal gap. So for instance, where we rely on EPA issued standards for certain contaminants under our hazardous waste materials program. So for contaminated sites, for hazardous waste generators, we incorporate into some of our state regulations enforceable standards set for certain contaminants. And we rely on those standards that are adopted by rule. That may be a scenario where if EPA backtracks on some of those risk-related standards for those contaminants, we may be able to come to LCAR and say we need an emergency rule because of the imminency that this creates. However, if there's not a strong imminency, if this is really to keep the regulatory or permitting program stable, to keep regulated entities to not allow sort of a gap in compliance or enforcement efforts, that would be an example of where we want to maintain our regulatory authority as a stable administration of authority throughout, as opposed to taking 8 months, 12 months to develop a fill-in state standard that we would then run through the normal rulemaking process.
Senator White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm very happy to see this. It actually gives me a little bit of relief because I've been worried about this and I wasn't sure kind of what our response would be, but I think it sets us up both from the literal rulemaking standpoint to be better prepared, but also potentially litigation wise, long term. If we move forward with certain things, it gives us a way to properly respond and set ourselves up when we have our state's attorney fighting further. I was surprised you didn't mention the Agency of Transportation because but I guess ANR kind of regulates it in a way with like DEC and stuff, but vehicle emission standards and enforcement of the Clean Air Act and also our tie-in with the California standards. I do worry that we will lose the authority with changes to federal regulation to enforce those. And I do hope that we can maintain them. And whatever happens with SIMP, who knows? But I think that this is a very smart move and seems like only a way of keeping on with good values. And I also, I know that you're not going to say this because you're a nonpartisan person, but it does feel like politically at this moment, there are drastic changes that are taking place that might very quickly be returned to normalcy, after we have a new election. So I don't think it benefits us to be trying to flip-flop our own regulations when maybe in less than how many months, 31 months now, we may have a completely different set of regulatory frameworks. So
Okay, I would suggest that we leave the July 1st, 2028 date, since that's what DEC asked for. I'm also just making sure this is for an emergency type situation where, as Jordan has pointed out, in most cases, it does take a little bit longer than 60 seconds to affect a rulemaking change. If it goes through LCAR, it's months and months and months. So there's sometimes public hearings, there's a lot of testimony. So this would only be in effect if something happened that immediately was a threat to Vermonters, from what I'm understanding. And again, if there's the supremacy clause would rule if there's an executive order that says, hold on, Vermont, here's the new executive order, then that ability to immediately change a rule would not have precedence.
Right. And so in many cases, the state can enact protections that are more stringent than the federal standard. So yes, and I also do want to point out that, again, I'm here on behalf of ANR.
But
The
this would be
language
for any-
does, yes, so it would extend to any entity that's defined as an agency currently under type 3. So that includes and you're welcome to hear from other agencies or departments or other entities that have rulemaking authority. It makes sense to extend this additional emergency rulemaking authority to all of the state agencies.
How would there be?
Oh, I would know off the top of my head, but we work closely, ANR works closely with VTrans, with the Department of Health, the Department of Public Safety. So in terms of regulations that affect the environment and public health and safety. So those are just to name a few that might benefit from something like this based on proposed federal actions.
Any other questions for Jordan?
no,
And
but
again, I'll just point out, this was passed last year. I don't know what happened either, but it didn't take effect. Gotta phrase this carefully. There's constant tension some of the time between national administration and state governments, back and forth, back and forth. It does seem as though there is a heightened sense of tension, since the election in 24. I have no idea what the next election is going to bring, but as Senator Morley correctly pointed out, this would still be in effect regardless of who is elected in 26. I guess I'm not really that upset or disturbed by something like this. Because again, it would have to be a real emergency situation where an existing federal law kind of got in the way and we could at least temporarily enact something that would answer that emergency situation.
Yeah.
That's how I'm understanding this. Is that fair?
yeah, and I think if I'm trying to think of like an emergency example, because it doesn't seem like the climate change example is coming across as much of an emergency to folks, but I consider it an emergency when we reduce our air quality.
Understood.
But I don't know if you could give us an example of especially around rights related to folks who are transgender, for example. There does seem to be a very significant move towards changing our own laws related to that. So I would consider it an emergency if there was like a disagreement with, like, you have to have M or F on your driver's license, but Vermont state law allows you to have multiple options, including, I believe, non-binary. And yeah, or X, exactly. So if the federal government were to change that, we could still do emergency rulemaking to allow it with another way. It's
Right.
my understanding.
Yeah,
with this.
and maybe a good, maybe an equivalent that's under the
Yeah.
A&R umbrella is environmental justice and
Mhm.
Act 154. And so that's another area where we have a state specific law. A&R and other agencies are subject to the requirements of that law. But we're seeing a drastic change in federal policy around environmental justice and some of the terms and concepts that apply to those principles. And we're being directed, at least A&R is being directed to not change our policies, but to no longer can fund and use that language or use certain parameters in some of our funded programs for which we rely on federal funding. So we are seeing a chipping away, or at least an effect from that perspective on what some of the state does. And what that means is we have to consider the risks of accepting that funding. We have to find alternative sources of that funding. And there are other risks that come with, continuing to act in a way that the administration is directing federal agencies to not act.
Understood. Elkhart would still have the ultimate say. correct?
Yes, this would not change Elcar's review, and they would have the ability to determine whether an emergency rule making does meet the standard that this would create.
Thanks very much, Jordan. We
Appreciate your time. Thank you.
I want to go next to, do you have a time constraint of any sort?
A little bit.
Okay, so let's go to Chris Group, and then I know you've been very patient, Eric, but I think we're gonna be able to get what you want to get done based on your previous estimates. So yes, please join us. This is I'll let him introduce Chris Group.
From the Joint Fiscal Office. I got a note from your committee assistant to come over.
Yeah.
I'm quite frankly not entirely sure why you want to hear from me today, because I don't really have anything. I don't have anything new to report from when I was here last Tuesday. The budget that you all passed out today had not materially changed with respect to this bill in the ensuing 8 days. So there is still, just as there was a week ago, the Senate budget construct still does not account for the $500,000 appropriation for the Ready Response grant program that's included in the bill. So I would presume that should this committee vote the bill out as is, that might be something that your colleagues and Senator Probst might put a contingency clause around or something, because the budget is still being negotiated with the two bodies. They haven't gone to conference yet, so we don't know where things are going to shake out. But based on where things are right now, that appropriation in the bill, it's the only appropriation still in the bill, is not funded in the budget construct. It was in the House's budget construct. It is not in the Senate's. And I just want to be clear that when I talk about the budget construct, the money isn't in the big bill. The money rides in a separate bill, but we keep a list of the handful of bills that have their other appropriation in them. And they go onto the big spreadsheet that we use to vote the budget. So we're not spending the same dollar twice.
So maybe I could suggest Tim Devlin can put in a phrase that just says, as appropriations are made or approved, this will or will not sort of, I mean, to me, it's.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, you already have similar language at the end of the bill with some contingencies around the other grant program. So it's in the text of the bill itself. So you might, Village Council might be able to sort of mirror that and say, the duty to implement it is contingent on appropriations being made. For that purpose.
I do see that now on page 29 and 29.
Yeah, nothing else has changed in that.
Okay,
However long it's been since I think.
so the 2.25 million was not in this year's FY 27
Are you
budget.
talking about the public safety dispatch?
Yeah.
Money? Yeah, that is a prior year appropriation that was made. It was 11 million originally, and some of it has been spent down. This is all like verbally describing what's in the chart in the last page of the fiscal note, but some of that has been authorized for expenditure. There is some proposed reallocations for some of the remaining balance that's in this bill. We expect that should all that happen, about 2.5 million of the original 11 million would be remaining for the legislature to figure out what to do with, but my understanding is nothing's changed. We hope to. So.
Does anyone else have questions for Chris? I think it sort of clears up.
Okay, but not.
You were in, I don't know if you were in the chamber when we had third reading, but it is. And it's been messaged back to the house.
Yeah, nothing's changed with respect to this in the last week. When I was here talking on, what was that? Like, it was a Tuesday afternoon, I think. They were doing markup right next door.
That's right.
So they were finalizing the decisions that they gave a thumbs up to right before the weekend and making sure we captured it all in the bill. So nothing material had changed on that front.
Well, we appreciate your promptness in getting over here.
No problem. And just so the committee's aware, because I know this is not a money committee, so I mean, come up with creative ways to spend money. We will update a fiscal note when a committee updates the bill. So the fiscal notes don't arrive at the budget, they arrive at the bill. So whenever you all decide to make a change to the bill and vote it out or not, that's when an updated fiscal note comes.
But it would still go next door.
And the bill's still gonna go next door because there's appropriation language in it, so.
Okay. Thanks, Chris.
No problem.
Eric.
I don't have any additional testimony, but I did want to run through a couple of things. So
Sure.
the first part is the Ready Response Grant Program. So just being cognizant, if there is no funding, I make sure that we don't force the EM and the food bank to come up with $500,000 borrowment. It's a great idea, and we've been talking about it all along. So we'll continue that work, but just making sure that we're not forced to do it. The second part is the Technical Rescue Grant Program. Again, if there's no funding, I would say strike the whole thing. We had a myriad of concerns about the structure that was built in there. It was too complex and not necessary, but if there's no money anyway, I'd say we just remove it. And then those teams are mostly getting helped now by the USAR team anyway for their limited funding. It's just an extra benefit there. I won't get into the funding of USAR. There is a section on local and regional organizations, so our regional emergency management committees, talking about who should be involved in them. And I had some discussions, I think, in length about lists and whole communities, and we had some discussions about that. So let me know if there's more that I can provide on that one. We had done the whole community link at her resource on one of their, and they tied it back to that FEMA language. So I know you had some concern about that, Saturday. So
I do.
understand that. And I think the way they worked around it was they said whole community and then had a caveat, like including potentially this group. So there was a somewhat of a call out, not a specific call out. So
Rather than making an explicit call out, because I know you pointed me to the place in the FEMA definition where it sort of specifically named people with disabilities. I would much rather have us. I tried to think of a way to sort of explain my concern. A whole community is a great idea in theory, but when you're on the fringes of a community or society, but because of structural oppression, someone from within, sort of inside, may fully believe they're including the whole community, never considering that person. And that today we may be talking about people with disabilities. Historically, we've talked about people of color. We've talked to, and a lot of times I think we've created these frameworks, you know, and I think when we're talking about race for a while, it's like color blindness, but that didn't actually solve any of the structural problems. It just put a pretty picture and made us feel good. So I would rather have us call out that we're doing, and you talked about it, this analysis that you do after an all hazards event of like, who didn't we get to? I want to find a way that we sort of name that for when you win the lottery and move somewhere really cool and it's not you doing this work. And the whole community's definition doesn't quite get there for me. I don't know if that helps frame my concern.
I understand. You and I are on the same page.
I think we are.
We don't like lists, but we understand that we might need a list. So I get it. Sometimes a list excludes people by the absence of their name. Sometimes it's too inclusive and doesn't allow you to go as much as you need. So I get it. In whatever way that you think you can manage that. What I've seen is last year we added in that specific language, it was AHS, and then we added in food-related organizations. Now this year, we're adding disability-led organizations. Next year, it'll be another thing. So, and there's 50 other organizations that aren't on there. So trying to think of a way to be all-inclusive, understanding that when you become all-inclusive, there are things that fall through the net, and how we got where we are. So I see both sides of it, and I don't have the magical definition. I try to find something more specific on the whole community. That's as close as we got, because it's a FEMA derived. It's not even a DEM derived, the FEMA derived, generally used across the population. So it's as close as we got. So I see what you're saying. And it's not going to be an issue for us, specifically in that section, because we're already trying to include them. So if you're pointing out specifically, we're already doing it anyway. I get it. If it's not needed, making sure that the next person does it too. So it's not a battle that I think needs to be fought at this point. It's good either way for us. Like I said, we're already doing it. I was just trying to facilitate the need to not to do it every year. There's always going to be a mixture.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. And I would prefer to use that sort of broader umbrella. I just want some sort of call out for that process of who wasn't included in the whole community approach and how do we bring them in? Because I actually think that it's less of a naming, oh, this time it was people with disabilities. This time it was getting the food access, and more of a how do we codify the analysis that says who was it and how do we bring them in? And I don't, for the purpose of this bill, maybe we don't need to do it, but I think longer term, it needs to be more codified.
And that's certainly something that we put into every after actions. Who did not benefit from our actions during this event? How can we make sure that that gets split up? Thankfully, that number is getting smaller and smaller, but it is always something that we're focused on. We spent a lot of time over the last year with foreign language. There's 19 to 25 different languages spoken in Vermont, and how we can get to them. That we're hearing state laws, how can we get to them? So we're working on those, but it's a valid point.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. And I'd be happy to try to workshop stuff around maybe for next year that really directs future you to keep doing that.
Well, it's good to hear that I won't be here forever.
We don't want to be
Sometime all the time.
We're in forever.
So that was the whole community approach. I think that was in a couple slides. There was a section, this was one of those sections where there was some language originally about detailer being accessible to individuals with disabilities. One, it's a very broad term, but two, we don't have the ability necessarily to define if we're successful in that measure, right? So we already have it available to the auditory challenged, to the visually challenged, they can do text or email or audio. We're working on the language. So in this section, I think you actually changed the language to if feasible type of language, which is fine. But in general, is it necessary? We're not really sure, but if it's something that we, again, to try to point the future me in the right direction, I think it's fine. We just wanted to point out that we're working towards that as we speak.
Okay.
Language access, we're working on that one. The one section that I wanted to check on was there's a section on the REMCs. I think that's still in there. Adding disability-led organizations as a voting member. And if we recall, last year we were having issues getting quorum with just the EMD of the town and the emergency service person from the town in that area. So 2 from each town in the jurisdiction, which is roughly the county. We were having trouble getting those people there to quorum. So then if we added another organization as a voting member, it throws the quorum off again. So one, has problems, but 2, they're not really voting on anything that's super relevant anyway. They're voting on minutes and the next president, and their ability to incorporate. So nothing earth shattering, that a different organization may have a different opinion on at that point. But also the ability of those organizations to actually provide people, like they have resource constraints too. So adding another meeting to them, and when we spoke to them, they didn't really think they had the capacity.
All right, so I just want to see that.
Yeah, they're already a non-voting member, as everyone is, so just not adding that language to create a voting.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that was.
I'm gonna give this to Tim and suggest, because I don't know whether you've seen, this is the written testimony that Eric has. And also the amendment about the federal rulemaking versus state rulemaking.
I think, yeah, my only change from the written is if we don't have the funding for the use our microgrants, just thing.
Okay, thank you very much. I have another get together at 4, so. Leave at some point, but I'd be glad to visit for a little bit longer if anybody has anything else. Okay, all right? Always gotta stretch it. I stretch it. Okay. Are you okay?
My contacts are really bothering me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. No, but I keep like blinking and looking like I'm maybe a little wild-eyed and it's just my contacts are annoying me.
Sorry. Okay, with that in mind, we will adjourn for the